Many people speculate and theorize over how simulating society within a game is supposed to take place. What rules and guidelines are necessary? How do people act? And what makes civilization tick? I believe there is a single factor that could give you the entire framework for how a civilization will operate and dictates how many societies today conduct themselves and progress. In this video, I'm going to break down the political science behind this factor and how I believe it will affect the current simulation event that our team is putting together in Vintage Story. And stick around to the end to find out where we are at in the progression of our event. First, let's diagnose current simulation events that have taken place. We will sacrifice many details for the sake of brevity, but I want to take two examples that I think illustrate this factor extremely clearly. What better example than a couple of the highest viewed events from the man himself? The two videos I want to compare are his 1,000 players Civ videos. The most recent video, where rich and poor civilizations are simulated via two islands. Essentially, one island has abundant resources, and the other does not. This is immediately interesting, and I'll tell you why. See, let's imagine you live across the street from Little Timmy. Little Timmy seems like a swell guy and doesn't have to work too hard for what he's got. On the other hand, you've gone out looking for copper, iron, bronze, but alas, you cannot find any ores. And while you were out looking for all those ores, you couldn't gather any food. So now you're starving, and meanwhile, Little Timmy is seemingly swimming in iron and clearly is up to some dark arts. What the hell is this guy doing? Is that a skull? Hold on, does he see us? I think he might. But he's making all the shiny bits and bobs with his resources and feasting like an absolute king. So that leaves you with a few options. You could run over to Little Timmy and see if he wants to share some of his resources with you, and perhaps he'll tell you to sod off and find your own stuff. Then in that case, you sneak into Little Timmy's house and you murder him in his sleep. What the hell? Where'd he, wait. Where the hell is this guy at? Hey, where do you think you're going, guy? Oh, no. Don't go down there. Dude, I'm telling you, don't go down. Why are you going? I'm telling you, you're going to regret this. Yeah, look at that. What do you think? Wait a second. You see this throughout the rich and poor video. There's this palpable friction between the two islands since one has resources and the other does not, which becomes a main driving force and propels most of the story. For instance, on the poor island, spoiler alert, there ends up being netherite, a highly thought of and sought after resource within the volcano on the island, which consequently leads to power struggles between factions, which is just one example. I'll come back to this in just a minute. Let's look at Ish's other video, where the main premise is that 1,000 players are spread out across 4 different islands, some with more resources than others, but no real significant difference outside of what type of biome the island is. And consequently, no major plot lines are attached to animosity between players because of a lack or surplus of any one given resource. Rather, players are, as Ish has stated, and I covered in my most recent video, freed up to roleplay. However, the more I've thought about this, I've realized it becomes roleplay for roleplay's sake and not because the environment that players have been placed in dictate what they must do. Whereas going back to the most recent video of his that we discussed, players had a conundrum to solve because, well, they lacked that one simple thing that we've been talking about. I know this seems basic, but here's why this matters more than you think. In Minecraft, resources are abundant everywhere and accessible to everyone. There's not great incentive to travel a long ways in Minecraft in search of materials that will further the player's progression. Rather, most travel is purely for aesthetic blocks or items that are simply just nice to have. Now, I'm not saying this is inherently wrong and trying to bash Ish's video, as I think narrative is important overall and extremely interesting for everybody involved, whether you're a player or a viewer, and I aim to intermingle both narrative and an analytical approach in my Civ Sim, hopefully. But this is where my point meets Vintage Story. Along with some things I've already witnessed in our simulation, you see the two vital things in Vintage Story are number 1, food, and number 2, ore or minerals. Both in Vintage Story are not measly tasks. For food in the early game, players have to resort to either cattail roots or picking berry bushes, but when both of these have been picked clean, you now have really only one option left, which is to hunt animals that are extremely hostile and dangerous, especially in a permanent death situation. If you're a bigger civilization, hunting animals is not exactly a problem for you in terms of manpower, but rather how many mouths you have to feed. And if you're constantly keeping up with feeding players until you get a consistent food source, you really are not progressing as quickly as you would anticipate when it comes to ores. In Minecraft, you can seemingly do all of these things at a fairly high clip with very little effort. In Vintage Story, you're putting your life at stake for food and making a commitment to perpetuate your survival over progressing your civilization. However, I believe that this creates opportunities for factions that delegate I believe that this makes opportunities for factions that delegate roles and use manpower in an efficient manner to get ahead of others. And this isn't theory, this is something that I've witnessed, and why I've become so infatuated with the event that we have been holding is not only have the political events that have occurred as a result of these dynamics been intriguing, but our players are a lot of fun to interact with as well. The other resource that I touched briefly in my last video are ores. Vintage Story's progression from copper to bronze, iron, and steel is vastly more nuanced than Minecraft and requires more commitment to go from one stage to the next. I won't delve deep into the mechanics behind the progression, but for example, one of the things you need to go from iron to steel in Vintage Story is bauxite. Bauxite can at times be extremely rare to obtain in this game, and let's say that I have some and you do not. Well, now what are we gonna do? Boom, power dynamic. And it's these inequalities between groups and the stories that sprout from them, to me, is what makes for an interesting story. Will the disparaged choose murder, trade, theft, or tyranny, perhaps? Me personally, I'm on the murder side of things, you know, it just makes it less complicated, I feel like. Coming back to Ish's latest video that we discussed earlier, I think the resource dynamic created by having the two islands is apparent early on in the video, as you see propaganda and growing discontent among the island that had fewer resources. The narratives created from this disparity is why I think this is one of the most interesting, if not best, civilization event created to date, and I think that most commenters would agree with the sentiment of rich and poor being extremely entertaining. To cap this off, power dynamics are one of the most interesting things in all of human history, and we can view these simulations and the political science of them through the lens of resources, and you can even look at the modern day political climate through this lens, with something like control of oil fields in the Middle East. Now, of course, not everything should be viewed in this perspective, as people may have their own agendas and ideologies and such, but I wanted to expand further upon my last video on how Vintage Story naturally creates this great environment for a simulation with the way progression and resources exist in this game. Resources are never just about survival when it comes to human beings. It's about structure. Those with abundance get to make the decisions, and those that are in need are beholden to them. Vintage Story is a game that grows in popularity by the day, and there is sure to be more awesome projects like this, so let me know what you guys want to see from me next while our simulation takes place, and thank you for watching.